So today we're going to talk about our initiative, which we call RIAT, the Restoring Invisible and Abandoned Trials Initiative.
Thanks, Peter. This is our argument, but I mean, our argument is we don't really have to explain. Most of you are not only familiar with the argument, but you actually put the argument on the map. We've got in this room 4 of the original 5 signatories of the RIAT Declaration of 2013, and I recognize the contribution made to the recognition of reporting bias or publication bias by some of the people in this room, especially Professor Taddy Dickerson sitting over there. Taddy, thanks very much. I'm not sure you got the right send-off when it was time, but I'll certainly give you my heartfelt send-off, and thank you very much for everything you've done. The argument is very simple, and the argument starts with the idea that the written word in biomedical literature, and we're talking about clinical trials, so we're talking about trials on human beings, the written word is the important part. The written word, by that we mean not just biomedical journals, but anything from a tweet down to a systematic review, of a single or multiple trials, guidelines, anything which gets people to prescribe a certain way, gets my colleague physicians to prescribe a certain way, or other healthcare workers to behave a certain way. That is what we're talking about. Now, that written word should be correct and it should be verifiable. It should not be distorted and it should be visible. The reality is that some trials remain invisible and some trials are distorted, and you don't realize that that is the case. So what are we going to do about this? Well, RIAT is a solution to this. It's not the only solution, and it may not be the major solution, but it's better than sitting on your backside doing nothing and just wringing your hands. We propose to use data transparency to address the problem of reporting bias. Data transparency, when we started working on data transparency, there was only one real source of regulatory data, which was the FDA. All that's changed. So again, the concept is using data to collect literature. And please don't think that this is just a club for 4 or 5 people to look good. It's for everybody, and it's for anybody who is involved in healthcare and is worried about what is going on, is worried about missed prescriptions, missed deaths, hidden harms, and exaggerated benefits of several different interventions. On the left-hand side, you've got the cover of the BMJ, green. You've got 2 icebergs, the RIAT icebergs. You see our logo is an iceberg. The one on the left is partially visible, only partially visible. The dimensions actually that are wrong. What is visible usually is only about the tip of the flag. But it is visible, at least you know it's there. The one that's really dangerous for navigation, because you go and you just sink on it, is the one on the right, which is completely invisible. You don't know it's there. Some trials still are unpublished, and some trials still are unregistered. Okay? Please don't think that all the trials are registered. And I'm not talking about all trials. I'm not talking about legacy trials. I'm talking about trials which are going on at the moment. So we have 2 remedies for this. An invisible trial gets published, a distorted trial gets restored. This is the RIAT initiative, which we published in 2013. That was the only person that's missing now is from the lineup is David Healy, but we will meet up with him very shortly. And in brief, RIAT is an international, we are international, effort to address the problem of reporting bias using data transparency. So looking at the underlying mass that we'll show you of data which underlies a single publication when, of course, it's published. Okay, so perhaps the flagship of the RIAT initiative is the restoration of the infamous paroxetine study 329. Paroxetine is an antidepressant, and it was first published under the name of Keller. Keller was the first author, but he certainly didn't write the paper. Somebody else did for $18,000. It was published in 2001. And the conclusions were that the paroxetine was generally well tolerated and effective. By this stage, I must have read and reviewed about 3,000 or 4,000 papers, and whenever I see the words safe and effective, I've got bells going off all over the place. Safe and effective are meaningless statements, because safety and effectiveness are not absolute, they're relative concepts. Safe compared to that, or unsafe compared to that, effective compared to this, or ineffective compared to that. Now, what happened was that in 2015, Lenori et al., including Australian psychiatrist John Druidini, David Healy, who's an Irish psychiatrist, and the late and lamented Mickey Nardo, who's a retired US psychiatrist from Austin in Texas, restored, using the RIAT initiative rules, restored study 329. And this study 329, when you say, well, 2001, it's old hat, who cares? Well, look at the altmetric on this, and look at the interest that this generated. And it still generates interest today, and I hope it's become the way that people look at paroxetine. Now, let me just give you a very brief, this is a very busy slide. It should be read from left to right, but I will just read you the second and third column. Let me just give you some idea of the distortion, level of distortion at study 329. This is an event, and it's an adverse event, and it's a superficial cut, okay? Superficial cut, in this case, it's superficial cut to the wrist. And it was coded as emotional lability, okay? And in fact, it was a suicide attempt. And it's a suicide attempt in a teenager. Now, you go and read the Keller 2001, and you get all these emotional labilities. You would have thought that half the American teenagers are emotionally labile, but they're not. Only some of those who took the drug were. So that is the nature of what we're dealing with. The idea that you get as soon as you get in the underlying data, all these details appear that you couldn't possibly see in a publication, if, of course, the trial is published in the first place. Action now is possible because we can get access to these underlying regulatory data. When we started on this, as I said, the only source of regulatory data was drugs at FDA. It's a very good source, very well, it's getting a lot more easier to read, but it was the only source available. Things have changed. Industry, probably under the pressure of the Tamiflu campaign, started making noises about sharing data. Maybe in the discussion we can pick up the discussion on the word sharing. But a group of pharma got together with obstacles, because you can't just walk in and ask for a CSR or a piece of one of the trials or several trials, but with obstacles, they put up this platform, and it's got restricted access, of course. Unrestricted access, though, is of the EMA, and I think this stands as a milestone. The European Medicines Agency, thanks to the push of Peter Goetze and the Nordic Cochrane Center, and the European Ombudsman, opened up and furnishes clinical study reports under two circumstances, either retrospectively, so you've got to ask for them, or prospectively. They've slowed down a bit because of a thing called Brexit, where they've had to move from London to Amsterdam. But they will pick up again, and they are prospectively publishing clinical study reports and important parts of clinical study reports. So they are accessible. Here's another example which is modeled on the EMA example, and this is Health Canada. They actually are pushing out CSRs both prospectively and retrospectively. So you've got to ask for them, but for the new ones, they come up on the website automatically. Okay, it's thanks to a politician called Terence Young, and who lost his daughter because of the side effects, 2001, of a drug. I'm not quite sure which drug that was, but it's called a law which is now enacted by the Canadian Parliament, Vanessa's Law, and Health Canada actually does provide us. And then there's the FDA pilot, which consisted a year ago of one CSR, and today consists of one CSR. So maybe in 2 years' time, it'll consist still of one CSR, maybe more CSRs. You don't know. Now, what does a clinical report, clinical study report and regulatory data look like? Well, this is what it looks like. This is a picture from the 70s, me, and that's me in drag. I hope you like my lipstick. This is what actually a clinical study report printed out looks like. Today, we don't have these. We've got e-CSRs, so it is all electronic. But if you were to print them, that's what it would look like, probably more than one. But with all the appendices, that's more than one. In other words, it's a ton of work. It is difficult. Addressing reporting bias is not easy. It's a ton of work. A ton. Okay, I'll pass on.
Right, and so that's where the RIAT Support Center comes into this story. It is a ton of work to use underlying data, reanalyze a trial, publish it fresh. It's the work that we think needs to happen, but first of all, nobody's used to doing this, right? People haven't even heard of it. That's why we're holding today's meeting, to try and get the word out about this even possibility of a research endeavor like this, that this can be done. We noticed in our own interactions that a lot of people started to hear over the past 4 or 5 years about clinical study reports, or CSRs, but a very small subset of those people had any sense of how they could get their hands on one. It was always, oh, you guys are the Tamiflu guys, and you read all these tens of thousands of pages. That's amazing. That's what you do. It's not what I do. And what I'm trying to tell everybody is actually it could be you. And some of the problems are just that people don't know, where do you get these data? Like which website? Are you serious? It's just a click away? And that's one of the things that's actually holding some people up. They don't realize where to go for it. So we created a support center to put resources in place to give that small little hand-holding bit, that really important thing to bring somebody over the line and say, here it is, you can see it, and you can start to sink your hands into it, work with it, see what it is, see whether you think it's usable. Turns out that these tens of thousands of pages are far more readable than you might expect. They're highly organized. Again, they are written for third-party scrutiny to begin with. Regulators receive them from sponsors. And so they're more accessible than you might think. And our website is there to help provide how-to advice on where you get these things like clinical study reports, how you put in a freedom of information request for reports that aren't already publicly available, which companies have what data. But in addition, we realize that it's still a lot of work even when you can get your hands on them. It is. That's the reality of lots of paper. It's still a lot of work. And so we were fortunate to set up this support center with close to $1 million earmarked for funding out to third parties, funding 6 teams to actually conduct these investigations. So not everybody has the time in their evenings and weekends to do this work. Here's a chunk of money. It's $150,000 per team to buy out your time and work on this. So here are just some screenshots to give you a sense of the resources we have, how to RIAT, the steps, access clinical trial data. Regulators, what can you get from regulators? Well, we start to describe what FDA has available, what you can get, both drugs, biologics, the nitty-gritty, because these things, if you have been on the FDA's website, they could be there, but they're not easy to figure out where they are. And just that little impediment can hold someone back from doing the work, unfortunately. So that's why we have the resource. Health Canada, what do they have? Where do you get it? That amazing website where it's 2 clicks to get to CSRs. Now for 11 products. About 5 months ago, it was 1 product. So it's happening quickly. How do you get to it on Health Canada? We have the links here in one place. EMA, the Japanese regulator, has materials available. As some in the audience know, some of these reports are extremely valuable and can help document misreporting and misinterpretation of trials at a very early stage when the drug is newly on the market. Australian government, and I'll be adding Germany soon as well, because they are also putting regulatory data on the web. The steps to RIAT, not fixed in stone, but we have some guidelines about how we think trial publication or reanalysis and republication can be done ethically and responsibly. A glossary, CSRs, OSPARs, EPARs, CRFs, CTDs. This whole world of regulatory data is full of acronyms that very few people who haven't been immersed in it know. Doesn't mean they're hard to understand, just means new terms are used that you have to be familiar with. We've tried to help demystify some of these terms by putting up a glossary. And again, the reason we gathered you here is to incentivize people to get involved in this, the money. So we have $450,000 left for teams. We don't know who's going to win. The competition is on now. The application deadline is February 1st, 2020, and the grant length will be up to 16 months. So please tell your colleagues, get people looking at this. It could be a lot easier money to get than an NIH grant. So go for it. Misreporting. Placebo-controlled trials. So over to you, Tom.
Okay.
We all love our randomized placebo-controlled trials, the gold standard.
So this is about HPV vaccine, and it's about New England Journal of Medicine. And this is a reporting of a pivotal trial. That's a trial that where, upon which decisions are made, and it's placebo-controlled. Here's another one, placebo-controlled. Here's another one that's placebo-controlled. And another one that's placebo-controlled, except that none of them are placebo-controlled. The so-called placebo is an aluminium-based adjuvant. An adjuvant in vaccinology is a substance, a chemical substance, which is added to antigens to form a vaccine and enhance its potency. In other words, it's anything but an inactive substance. It's a very, very powerful stimulant. This particular one, which is I won't go into the name, but the acronym is AAHS, is probably the one that sustains a high level of antibodies for a very long time. So it is no placebo. And calling it placebo, and in fact, interestingly enough, it's sometimes called placebo even in the CSRs, is a complete misrepresentation of reality. And it's also very dangerous because, of course, you can imagine if you have a trial where you've got an active arm, which is made up of the vaccine, which also contains AHS, and you've got a placebo containing AHS as comparator, you look at the harms and the benefits, and you don't know what's what, what causes what. That is not what trials are about.
So this example of Gardasil, the reason we're talking about it is, this is one of the issues that caught our attention 3 years ago when we started the RIAT Support Center. And the more we looked at this case, and you'll notice, on this page, there's 4 publications, all of Gardasil, all calling themselves placebo-controlled. And we felt this needs to be corrected. RIAT should be the answer. But then should we go through an entire trial to reanalyze it just to find the same thing and write the word AAHS control instead of placebo? Who's going to publish that? It's essentially like a typographical error. But it's a critical typographical error, right? So we've started to think in the RIAT Support Center, this is one RIAT project we're working on within the Support Center, on how do you correct this. And we came up with the term focused riots, because there's a small detail which has big implications. So in our focused riot, which we're now trying to get published, we have two goals: to correct the record on what was used on the control, but do it for all four, actually there's 5 RCTs in one go. And also ask the critical question, which has not been published, of why would a control like that be selected? And for that, we're using the clinical study reports. And we put that together as a research manuscript, which we're now working on getting published. So these focused riots, because we realize that this ask for a full riot is really still a lot of work, even when there's money, we want to make RIAT more accessible and do a lot of the work that needs to be done, even when the work is small, narrow, but has big impact. And so we think that we can do this through these more focused riots. The other problem is that CSRs, even though they are available for many things, they're quite inaccessible for many other trials, for many drugs. And so it might take months or years to get these. And this is an impediment to correcting the record. We started to come to the realization that you may not need CSRs. Actually, these more accessible regulatory documents like FDA medical officers' reviews may contain enough information. So you go back to this study 329 example. Although it was corrected through RIAT in 2015, that's 14 years after the original publication, the FDA's documents on FDA's website in 2002 were already explaining that there was no efficacy versus placebo in this trial. So we think that's really important, and that these medical officers' reviews, which again, and statistical officers' reviews, these regulatory documents, which are quite accessible compared to underlying clinical trial data, could be the basis for rioting. Here's the medical officer's report, where Andy Mosholder is saying this about that study 329. No efficacy. And then I thought back to this canonical Eric Turner paper, 2008 New England Journal paper, where he looks at all the SSRIs for depression, and just using the FDA medical officer's reviews, he's able to actually say, no, the efficacy is this, not what you say in the publication. And that's each of those little bars is how the efficacy estimate moved over. How does he know? Again, based on these publicly available FDA documents. Why not RIAT based on this? This is very narrow. It can be done perhaps quite quickly without a lot of efforts. And we can have a new original publication that corrects the record. So we know, probably many people in this room know of drugs at FDA. There's also regulatory documents available from the EMA, EPARS, and Australia has OSPARS. So to bring it all together, we know the problems with trial publications and reporting bias. We think that data is the answer, and through the RIAT mechanism, we can take those data to produce a scientific record that is more trustworthy and reliable and have the underlying data available. So thank you for listening. Now's the time to get involved.
You support calling that a failed trial? I think that we should come out from some things I've seen in the newspaper also, this showing of no difference.
Yeah.
People consider it a failed
Yeah,
trial.
so this is a quote from the medical officer report, the FDA's. No, I agree. I think as academics, our focus should be on good research design and good reporting, and not focused on being too excited or not excited about what the results show. Right? I think that's the neutral sense. So I think if you're reflecting that it didn't show a difference from placebo should be seen as a failure, I agree with you. The facts are what they are, and that actually is a good information for patient safety. To know that this drug doesn't, that's a success. Yeah.
If it's well designed.
I agree with you. I think it's a good call, good point.
Great. For the mini RIAT idea of sort of picking up things that are kind of obvious from reading a paper that is kind of reported incorrectly, but you don't need to analyze data in any way, have you tried to speak with, I don't know, say journalism students or other people who may be able to dig into that as well as investigators, since it's not really like analyzing data or doing some of this, is more kind of digging through documents and finding information?
I haven't spoken with a lot of journalism students. As you would know, we have a huge journalism school down at College Park, and it would be something to explore to see if it resonates. My suspicion is still we sometimes underestimate what's needed to really detect and understand spin, but I think with training, to get journalism students training on how to read studies better, how to detect misreporting, and because there are patterns, that could work. It's a good idea. We can. Right. Right. Excellent idea. We can give the workshop together.
So Peter, this is
Tom,
a comment and a question, I guess, built into one. And that is, are there ways, as I think Kay was inferring here, to actually look at these things in a different or maybe better way? And so my example is, the way that these are put into regulatory documents is there's an integrated summary of efficacy and an integrated summary of safety, and never the twain shall meet, right? And in fact, the denominators are even different in those. So in other words, we're looking at these things as completely distinct rather than trying to merge them together at the patient level. So in other words, there's a paper written by Scott Evans, who used to be at Harvard, who's now running the GW biostatistics section, talking about how really within a trial there are 4 types of patients. People who get benefit and no harm, benefit and harm, no benefit, no harm, and then the category you don't want to be in, no benefit and all harm. And that maybe reanalyzing things in that way gives us a better view, and maybe even then allows us to figure out who are the people in that top category who get benefit and no harm. That is not the way that regulators look at things now, but you could, because the data in that CSRs actually allows you to make what I think is a better assessment of benefit and harm and who gets it.
So, and Tom, if you want to speak to any of these, I think it's a great idea, and it's helpful because we really want RIAT to be thought of as something that's open to ideas. We don't really hold the keys, to the palace here. It is an open idea that should be dynamic, should be changing, should be bringing in new ideas. And so, immediately I reflect on it and think. Some people say, "Oh, that's subgroup analysis. That worries me." That's the kind of thing we should think through. When we write it up, let's say we did get through that, we think, okay, this is how we can do it. Our general principle with RIAT is report the data as per the trial protocol, but do additional analyses so long as they're clearly specified as these post hoc analyses. And that's acceptable because we shouldn't restrict ourselves to what was in the protocol. So sometimes protocols are asking the wrong questions. And there may be data that can answer the more important questions. So I think that's a great idea as well.
IOM has taken up, or I guess National Academy of Medicine has taken up this type of issue with the heterogeneous treatment effects. Is just another term for
Heterogeneous treatment effect, yeah.
Excluding low-risk people, focusing on high-risk potential benefit.
And we have the people within our community to talk about the sort of the expected criticisms of that, which I think will be around subgroup, post hoc, exploratory analysis. I think that would be really something to work on in terms of first establishing the thinking behind it, perhaps with Scott Evans, and then move forward with that kind of analysis. Yeah, very interesting.
I thought what you were going to say was, to do that kind of analysis, you need patient-level data.
Yeah.
Do you have that? Or is this all at the aggregate level in CSRs?
So the biggest problem we have is the short answer is no. The EMA and Health Canada, which are two only proactive regulators in data transparency, don't receive electronic patient-level data to begin with. So they don't have it to release. FDA, as far as I know, is the only regulator on the planet that routinely receives and analyzes patient-level data. So this is a big problem. They might have CSRs that contain all of it, but you'd have to go from paper back to electronic, which is still a mess. ClinicalStudyDataRequest.com, what industry puts up, gives access to electronic patient-level data and SAS portals, but then you're dealing with the complexities that come with that. They have to screen your research protocol. There's time. You have to be at an institution, which then has the contracting, to set the data use agreement in place. And so it adds hurdles. So there are ways to get it, I'd say, but it's not as accessible as it needs to be.